At 72 years old, I thought my son was finally including me in his life again. He said he wanted to take me to sign up for watercolor classes at the community center, something I'd mentioned wanting to try years ago. I was so excited that someone remembered, that he cared enough to help me pursue a hobby. But when we pulled into the parking lot, I didn't see a community center. I saw manicured lawns, a fountain, and a sign that read, Serenity Pines Senior Living Facility. My son turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said the words that shattered my world. Mom, I've already handled the paperwork. You're all set to move in today. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and I never imagined my own child would lie to me like that. The betrayal wasn't just in the deception itself, but in how carefully it had been planned, how thoroughly he'd orchestrated every detail to make sure I had no way to refuse. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed, but in that moment, sitting in his car staring at that building, I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. Let me take you back 6 months before that terrible day, because that's when everything really started, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was living in my small apartment in Oakland, the same place I'd called home for 15 years after my husband Bernard passed away. It wasn't much, just a modest one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older building, but it was mine. I'd filled it with memories, photographs covering every wall, my collection of vintage teacups displayed in the kitchen cabinet Bernard had built for me, and the garden I'd cultivated on my small balcony where tomatoes and herbs grew in mismatched pots. My son Derek had always been what people called successful. He worked in finance, wore expensive suits, and lived in a modern house in the suburbs with his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage children. We'd never been particularly close, not in the way I'd hoped when I was raising him as a young mother. Bernard and I had worked so hard to give him opportunities, putting him through private school and college while we lived modestly, always putting his needs first. I'd imagined that as adults we'd have the kind of relationship where we'd meet for coffee regularly, where he'd call just to chat, where I'd be a real part of his children's lives. But Derek was always busy. Too busy for weekly dinners, too busy for holiday gatherings that lasted more than a few hours, too busy to return my calls for days at a time. I told myself it was normal, that adult children have their own lives, that I shouldn't be needy or demanding. So I filled my days with other things. I volunteered at the library twice a week, teaching English to immigrants who reminded me of my own parents who'd come to this country with nothing but hope and determination. I had my friend group, other widows and retirees who met for lunch at the Chinese bakery on Saturdays. I took long walks through the neighborhood, knowing every shopkeeper by name. The first sign that something was changing came when Derek started calling more frequently. First, I was thrilled. Maybe he was finally making time for his mother. Maybe he'd realized how quickly time passes and wanted to be more present in my life. He'd call on Tuesday evenings, always around 7, and ask how I was doing. The conversations never lasted long, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but they were more than I'd gotten from him in years. Then the questions started getting more specific. How are you managing the stairs in your building, Mom? Do you ever feel unsafe in your neighborhood? How's your health been? Are you remembering to take all your medications? I answered honestly because I had no reason not to. Yes, the stairs were getting harder as my knees bothered me more. The neighborhood had changed and sometimes I did feel a bit nervous walking home after dark. I'd forgotten to refill my blood pressure medication once or twice. These seemed like normal concerns for a son to have about his aging mother. What I didn't realize was that Derek was building a case. Every admission of difficulty, every moment of normal human forgetfulness that comes with age, was being cataloged and used as evidence that I couldn't live independently anymore. Jennifer started joining these calls, her voice dripping with a concern that felt performative rather than genuine. Margaret, we're just so worried about you all alone in that apartment. What if you fell and no one found you for days? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? I should have seen it then, should have recognized the pattern, but I was lonely. Having my son and daughter-in-law express concern for me, even if it felt excessive, was better than the years of near silence I'd endured. I actually felt grateful that they cared enough to worry. How foolish I was. The incident that Derek would later use as his main justification happened on a perfectly ordinary Thursday in March. I'd gone to the grocery store, bought my usual items and returned home. I put away the cold items immediately, but I left a bag with dry goods on the kitchen counter, planning to put them away after I rested for a bit. My neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, dropped by unexpectedly with some soup she'd made, and we got talking. 2 hours passed before she left, and by then I was tired, so I went to take a nap. The grocery bag stayed on the counter overnight. The next morning Derek called, which was unusual since our calls were typically on Tuesdays. Mom, Mrs. Kowalski called Jennifer. She's concerned about you. She said she came by yesterday and you seemed confused, that you left groceries out all night. I was stunned. Confused? I hadn't been confused at all. I'd simply been enjoying my neighbor's company and forgotten about one bag of groceries that didn't need refrigeration. It was a perfectly normal thing that could happen to anyone at any age. But Derek had seized on it. Mom, this is exactly what we've been worried about. You're forgetting things. You're not taking care of yourself properly. I tried to explain, but he talked over me. His voice filled with a certainty that left no room for my perspective. Jennifer and I have been discussing this, and we think it's time to look at some options for you. Safer living situations where you'd have support. I felt a chill run through me. Options? What kind of options? Just some nice communities where there are other people your age, where someone checks on you, where you don't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or managing everything alone. He made it sound so reasonable, so caring. I told him I'd think about it, but honestly, I had no intention of leaving my home. I was 72, not 90. I was still active, still volunteering, still completely capable of managing my own life. Over the next few months, the pressure intensified. Derek started visiting more often, which should have made me happy, but each visit felt like an inspection rather than quality time with my son. He'd look through my refrigerator and point out expired items I'd missed. He'd notice dust in corners I hadn't gotten to yet. He'd ask me questions designed to test my memory, like what I'd had for dinner 3 nights ago, questions I couldn't always answer, not because I was losing my memory, but because the meals weren't particularly memorable. Jennifer started sending me brochures for senior living communities. Beautiful places with names like Golden Years Estate and Sunset Gardens, showing happy elderly people playing cards and doing Tai Chi on manicured lawns. I threw them away. This isn't for me, I told Derek firmly. I'm not ready for that kind of place. I'm still independent. I have my friends, my volunteering, my life here. His response chilled me. Mom, you're being stubborn. We're trying to help you. What happens when you can't manage anymore? What happens when something serious goes wrong? I wanted to scream that nothing was seriously wrong, that I was managing just fine, that normal aging wasn't a disease that needed to be institutionalized. But Derek had made up his mind, and I was beginning to realize that my opinion didn't matter to him. The manipulation became more sophisticated. Derek started canceling plans at the last minute, leaving me disappointed and alone on days I'd been looking forward to seeing my grandchildren. When I'd call upset, he'd say things like, "See, Mom? You're getting so emotional over small things. That's not healthy. This is why we're worried." He was gaslighting me, making me doubt my own reasonable reactions to his unreasonable behavior. My friends noticed the change in me. At our Saturday lunch, my friend Patricia asked if I was okay, noting that I seemed anxious and distracted. I confided in them about Derek's pushing for me to move to a senior facility. The 4 women at that table, all around my age, all still living independently, were outraged on my behalf. "You're one of the most capable people I know," Margaret, Patricia said firmly. "You volunteer more hours than some people work. You take care of yourself beautifully. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Their support meant everything, but it couldn't change what was happening with my son. Derek had begun making comments about how I was isolating myself, how my friends were probably not giving me good advice, how people my age often couldn't see their own decline. He was systematically undermining every support system I had, every voice that might contradict his narrative that I was failing. Then came the lie about the watercolor classes. It was early September when Derek called, his voice warmer than it had been in months. "Mom, I know I've been pushing you about moving, and I'm sorry if I've been too forceful. I was talking to Jennifer, and we realized we've been so focused on what we think is best that we haven't been listening to what you want." The words were exactly what I needed to hear, and I felt a rush of relief and love for my son. Maybe he'd finally understood, finally recognized that I was still capable of making my own decisions. He continued, you mentioned once that you wanted to try watercolor painting. There's a great class starting at the community center, and I thought maybe I could take you to sign up for it. We could grab lunch afterward, make a day of it. What do you think? I was overjoyed. Not just about the painting class, though I was genuinely excited about that, but about Derek showing interest in something I cared about, making time to spend with me doing something other than inspecting my life for signs of decline. We set the date for the following Saturday. I spent the week looking forward to it, even going to the art supply store to buy a small set of watercolor paints and brushes to practice with beforehand. I felt young again, excited about learning something new, grateful that my son was finally supporting rather than criticizing me. I told all my friends about it at our Saturday lunch, and they were happy for me, though Patricia's smile seemed a bit worried in a way I didn't understand at the time. That morning I dressed carefully.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Choosing a comfortable outfit suitable for an art class, putting on the jade bracelet Bernard had given me on our 20th anniversary. Derek arrived exactly on time, which should have been my first warning since he was habitually late. He was alone, which was the second warning. Jennifer usually came along on outings, but I was too excited to notice these red flags. The drive took longer than I expected. I mentioned this to Derek, saying I didn't realize the community center was so far from my apartment. He smiled that smile that didn't reach his eyes and said they'd moved the art programs to a new facility. Something about renovations at the old building. It seemed plausible enough that I didn't question it further. We drove out of Oakland through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, getting progressively more suburban and isolated. I started feeling uneasy when we turned into a long driveway flanked by professional landscaping. This doesn't look like a community center, I said, my voice uncertain. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Just trust me, Mom. This is going to be good for you. That's when I saw the sign. Serenity Pines Senior Living Facility. My stomach dropped. Derek, what is this? Why are we here? He parked the car and turned to face me, and I saw no warmth in his expression, only determination. Mom, I've already handled the paperwork. You're all set to move in today. Jennifer packed your things yesterday while you were at the library. Everything you need is already in your room. The world tilted. They'd been in my apartment? They'd gone through my things without my permission? They'd packed up my life while I was innocently shelving books and helping Mrs. Lopez with her English pronunciation? I can't believe you did this, I whispered. Derek, take me home right now. This isn't happening. I'm not moving here. His jaw set in that stubborn way I remembered from his childhood, but there was no childish innocence in it now. Mom, this is happening. We've paid 3 months in advance. Your apartment lease is being terminated. This is what's best for you even if you can't see it right now. The betrayal was complete. He'd orchestrated everything, made sure I had no home to return to, trapped me before I even knew what was happening. I reached for the door handle, thinking I'd get out and call a taxi, call my friends, call anyone who could help me escape this nightmare. But Derek was faster. He came around to my side, opened the door, and took my arm in a grip that looked gentle to any observer but was firm enough that I knew I couldn't pull away without causing a scene. Come on, Mom. Let's go meet the staff. They're expecting you. You're going to love it here. I wanted to scream, to fight, to refuse to move. But I was 72 years old, physically no match for my middle-aged son, and we were in a parking lot where staff members were already approaching with welcoming smiles, clearly briefed on the situation. Any resistance I showed would only be used as more evidence that I was unstable, that I needed to be here. Derek had thought of everything. As they walked me through those doors, as Derek signed final papers and handed over my identification and insurance cards that he'd somehow obtained, as a nurse with kind eyes but firm hands guided me to a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and contained none of my cherished possessions, I felt something inside me break. Not just my trust in my son, though that was shattered beyond repair, but my sense of self, my autonomy, my belief that I had any control over my own life. The room was small but pleasant enough, with a single bed covered in a floral bedspread that tried too hard to feel homey, a dresser, a small desk, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Not my balcony garden. Not my view of the neighborhood where I'd watched children grow up and seasons change. Just cars and pavement. My boxes were stacked in the corner, And I could see that Jennifer had not packed carefully. Things had been thrown together hastily, and I already knew that treasured items would be missing or broken. Derek stood in the doorway, and I saw something flicker across his face that might have been guilt or might have been relief. "Mom, I know you're upset right now, but you'll see. This is better. You'll make friends. They have activities. You won't have to worry about anything." I turned my back to him, unable to look at his face, unable to hear his justifications. "Just go, Derek. You've done what you wanted. Just go." He lingered for a moment, perhaps hoping I'd turn back around, hoping for some sign that I'd forgive him. When I didn't move, didn't speak, I heard him sigh. "I'll come visit next week. We'll bring the kids. You'll feel better once you settle in." His footsteps retreated, and I heard the door close softly behind him. Only then did I let myself cry. Not the dignified tears of someone gracefully accepting change, but the broken sobs of someone whose life had just been stolen from them. I cried for my apartment with its memories and its garden. I cried for my independence and my dignity. I cried for the son I thought I'd raised, who seemed to have been replaced by this stranger who valued his own convenience over my autonomy. I cried for the friends I'd see less now that I was miles away in the suburbs. I cried for the life I'd still been living just that morning, unaware it was my last day of freedom. A knock on the door interrupted my tears. A woman in her 40s entered, wearing scrubs printed with cartoon flowers and a smile that was professional but not unkind. "Hello, Margaret. I'm Diane, one of the nurses here. I wanted to check on you and see if you needed anything." I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. "I need to go home. That's what I need." Her smile became sympathetic but firm. "I know this is a hard transition. Most of our residents feel upset at first. But I promise you, Serenity Pines is a wonderful community. You'll adjust." She wasn't listening. None of them would listen. I was now a resident, a word that sounded so much nicer than prisoner but meant essentially the same thing. I'd lost my right to make decisions about my own life the moment Derek signed those papers. That first night was the longest of my life. I couldn't bring myself to unpack, to arrange my things in this room that wasn't mine, in this place I hadn't chosen. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how my life had come to this. I was 72, healthy, mentally sharp, and I'd been tricked into a nursing home by my own child. How many other people here had similar stories? How many had been railroaded by family members who confused normal aging with incompetence? The next morning, someone knocked loudly at 7 to inform me that breakfast was served in the dining hall from 7 to 8:30. I wasn't hungry, but I went anyway, hoping maybe I'd find an ally, someone who understood what had happened to me. The dining hall was large and bright, with round tables seating 6 people each. Elderly men and women sat in small groups, some chatting, some eating in silence, some staring into space with expressions I couldn't quite read. I took a tray and got eggs and toast that were both lukewarm and sat at a partially empty table. An elderly woman with white hair and sharp eyes looked at me appraisingly. "You're new." "I'm Gladys. Been here 2 years." I nodded. "Margaret. I arrived yesterday." Gladys studied me with an intensity that suggested she saw more than most people. "Let me guess. Your family put you here and you didn't want to come. How did you know?" She laughed bitterly. "Because you still have fight in your eyes. Give it a few months. Most people here either accept it or give up." "I don't plan to do either," I said firmly. Something shifted in Gladys's expression. "Good. Then maybe you and I should talk. But not here. Too many ears. Come to my room after breakfast. Room 114. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since Derek revealed his betrayal. Hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe there were others here who hadn't given up, who still believed they deserved better than this. After breakfast, I found Gladys's room. It was slightly larger than mine and filled with books, photographs, and what looked like legal documents scattered across her desk. She closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair. "So tell me your story, Margaret. How'd you end up here?" I told her everything. The increasing pressure from Derek, the incident with the grocery bag blown out of proportion, the brochures, the lie about the watercolor class, waking up to find my life had been dismantled without my consent. Gladys listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her expression growing darker. When I finished, she said, Your son committed what's called unlawful confinement in some jurisdictions. Did you sign anything? Did you consent to be placed here? I shook my head. He signed everything. I never agreed to any of this. Gladys's smile was grim. Then Margaret, you might have options. Legal options. But I have to warn you, fighting your family is hard. They'll say you're incompetent, that you're delusional, that you need to be here for your own safety. You'll need evidence that you're perfectly capable of independent living. Do you have money for a lawyer? I thought about my bank account, my small savings, my social security. I have some money. Not a lot, but some. Gladys pulled out a business card from her desk drawer. This is my daughter, Rachel. She's an elder law attorney. She's been helping me fight my own situation. My son has power of attorney he obtained through questionable means, and I've been working to get it revoked. It's been 2 years and I'm still here, but I'm making progress. I took the card, feeling that flicker of hope grow stronger. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Gladys's eyes grew distant. Because 3 years ago I was you. I was living independently, managing fine, and my son decided I needed to be institutionalized. He used my grief over my husband's death as evidence of depression and incompetence. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already here. I've been fighting ever since, and if I can help someone else avoid the years of legal battles I've endured, then maybe my suffering has some purpose. We talked for 2 hours, Gladys sharing what she'd learned about elder rights, about the legal system, about how to document evidence of competence and independence. She warned me it would be hard, that Derek would fight back, that there were no guarantees. But at least I'd be fighting, not giving up, not accepting this theft of my life. That afternoon, I called Gladys's daughter from the phone in my room. Rachel Chen, no relation, listened to my story with the careful attention of someone who'd heard similar tales too many times. Miss Chen, Margaret, I can help you, but I need to be honest about what you're facing. Your son has already established a narrative that you're not capable of independent living. We'll need to counter that with evidence, documentation, maybe even a psychiatric evaluation to prove your competence. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm not staying here. I didn't choose this. I don't belong here. Rachel's voice was kind but realistic. The retainer for this kind of case is $5,000. Can you access your funds, or does your son have control of your finances? I felt my blood run cold. I don't know. I have a bank account, but I don't know if Derek has access to it. We need to secure your financial autonomy immediately. Can you get to a bank? I looked out my window at the parking lot, at the world I was now separated from. I don't have a car. I don't even know if I'm allowed to leave the grounds. That's your first task then, Rachel said firmly. Find out what kind of facility this is. If it's assisted living, you should have the right to come and go freely. If they try to stop you, that's unlawful detention. Document everything. Write down every conversation, every restriction, every detail. This documentation will be crucial. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since that terrible moment in Derek's car. Determination. I wasn't going to let my son steal my life. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. But first, I needed to understand exactly what kind of prison I was in and what rules bound me here. The next few days revealed the answer in ways both subtle and obvious. Serenity Pines wasn't a nursing home in the medical sense. It was assisted living, which meant residents were supposed to have freedom of movement and choice. But the reality was far more restrictive than the marketing materials suggested. There were activities scheduled throughout the day: bingo, craft sessions, movie screenings, gentle exercise classes. Participation wasn't technically mandatory, but staff would knock on your door if you missed too many, expressing concern about isolation and depression. Meals were served at set times, and while you could skip them, the kitchen closed between meals, so if you weren't there, you went hungry. There were visiting hours, as if we were children at boarding school rather than adults with the right to see people whenever we chose. Most insidiously, there was a culture of infantilization that pervaded every interaction. Staff called us by our first names while expecting to be called by their titles. They spoke in bright, encouraging tones about the simplest activities, as if we should be proud of ourselves for completing a jigsaw puzzle or showing up for chair yoga. Our opinions on anything from menu choices to room temperature were solicited but rarely acted upon. We were managed, not respected. I watched my fellow residents carefully over those first days, trying to understand who had chosen to be here and who, like me, had been placed here against their will. Some seemed genuinely happy, people who'd been truly struggling with independence and found relief in having support and community. Others seemed resigned, having accepted this as their final chapter. And then there were a few like Gladys, whose eyes held the same fire as mine, who hadn't surrendered their sense of self. On my 4th day, I decided to test the boundaries. After breakfast, I announced to the front desk that I was going for a walk outside the grounds. The young woman at the desk, Emily, looked uncertain. "Oh, Margaret, it's quite cold today. Wouldn't you rather join the quilting circle in the activity room?" I smiled politely but firmly. "No, thank you. I'd like to go for a walk." Emily's smile became more strained. "Well, I should probably call your son first just to make sure he knows you're going out." That's when I understood the truth. I wasn't free. Every movement I made would be reported to Derek, every action scrutinized, every attempt at independence questioned. This was a cage with pretty landscaping and scheduled activities, but it was still a cage. "I'm 72 years old," I said, keeping my voice level despite the fury building inside me. "I'm not a prisoner. I don't need anyone's permission to take a walk." Emily's professionalism cracked slightly, revealing genuine discomfort. "Just our policy for safety. We like to know where our residents are." "Am I legally required to tell you where I'm going?" Emily hesitated. "Well, no, not legally, but your family has requested that we keep them informed. Then you can inform them after I return." I walked past her desk and out the front door, half expecting security to stop me, but no one did. The cold air hit my face like freedom, and I walked down the long driveway with my heart pounding, expecting at any moment to be called back or followed. I made it to the main road and kept walking until I found a small strip mall about half a mile from Serenity Pines. There was a coffee shop and I went inside, ordered a coffee I didn't really want, and sat at a table feeling like I'd escaped prison. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Patricia. "Margaret, we've been so worried. Derek called and said you'd moved into a senior community for your health, but it all seems so sudden." I told her everything. The deception, the betrayal, the loss of my apartment, the restrictions at Serenity Pines. Patricia was silent for a long moment after I finished, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking with anger. "Margaret, this is kidnapping. This is abuse. You need to get out of there." "I'm trying. I've contacted a lawyer. But I need help. Can you come visit? Can you bring some things I need? My real documents, my checkbook. Anything Jennifer might have missed when she packed?" Patricia didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow. And Margaret, we're going to fix this. You're not alone." That conversation sustained me as I walked back to Serenity Pines, as I faced Emily's disapproving expression and her comment that I'd been gone for 2 hours and everyone had been worried. I smiled and said I'd been perfectly safe getting coffee. "Thank you for your concern." The small victory felt enormous. That evening, Derek called. "Mom, I heard you left the facility today without telling anyone. That's not safe. You could get lost." "I could get lost walking half a mile to a coffee shop in broad daylight?" "Derek, I'm not senile. I'm not confused. I'm perfectly capable of going where I want." His sigh was heavy with exasperation. "This is exactly the kind of poor judgment we were worried about. You can't just wander off. What if something had happened to you? Then I would have handled it like I've been handling things my entire adult life." "Derek, you had no right to do this to me. You lied to me. You stole my apartment. You imprisoned me here." His voice hardened. "You're being dramatic, Mom. This isn't prison. It's a nice facility where you're safe and cared for. You should be grateful we found such a good place. If you'd been more reasonable about moving on your own, we wouldn't have had to do it this way." The blame shifting was breathtaking. He'd committed an act of profound betrayal, and was somehow making it my fault for not compliance with his wishes. "I'm contacting a lawyer, Derek. I'm going to fight this." There was a pause, then a laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Mom, no lawyer is going to help you. We have documentation from your doctor about your declining health. We have statements from neighbors about your concerning behavior. You can't win this. Just accept that this is where you need to be." The call ended, and I sat in my small room feeling the weight of what I was facing. Derek had been planning this for months, maybe longer. He had evidence, statements, documentation. He'd built a legal fortress around his decision. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his mother's will to fight for her freedom. Patricia arrived the next afternoon with 2 large bags and a determination in her eyes that reminded me why we'd been friends for 20 years. She'd brought clothes from my apartment that Jennifer had somehow missed, my important documents that I'd kept in a locked box under my bed, and most importantly, my checkbook and financial records. Derek hadn't thought to look for those, probably assuming an elderly woman wouldn't keep track of such things or wouldn't know how to fight back. We sat in my room while Patricia updated me on what she'd discovered. Margaret, I went to your apartment building yesterday. The landlord confirmed that Derek gave notice and paid a penalty to break your lease early. But here's the thing, your lease was in your name only. Derek had no legal right to terminate it without your signature. The landlord assumed you'd authorized it because Derek presented himself as handling things on your behalf due to your declining health. Patricia's expression was grim. I told the landlord what really happened. He's horrified and said if you want the apartment back, he'll work with you, though your unit has already been promised to new tenants for next month. The news hit me hard. My home wasn't just gone because of Derek's manipulation. It was gone because a landlord had trusted a son who claimed to be acting in his mother's best interest. How many people had Derek convinced of his narrative? How many had accepted his version of events without questioning whether I'd actually agreed to any of this? Patricia pulled out a folder from her bag. I also contacted your doctor, Dr. Morrison. She was shocked when I told her what happened. She said Derek called her office 3 months ago asking questions about your health and cognitive function, but she told him you were in excellent health for your age. She never provided any documentation supporting a claim that you couldn't live independently. In fact, she's willing to write a letter stating exactly that. Relief flooded through me. So Derek lied about having medical documentation. He lied to the facility, to me, probably to everyone. Patricia nodded. He manufactured a crisis that didn't exist. The question is whether he did it out of misguided concern or something more calculated. I thought about Derek's expensive lifestyle, his big house, his luxury cars. I thought about how he'd started asking about my finances months ago, questions about my savings and my Social Security income. I thought about the life insurance policy I had with him listed as beneficiary. Patricia, I said slowly, what if this isn't just about him thinking he knows what's best? What if there's a financial motive? My friend's face darkened. That's exactly what I've been wondering. How much do you have in savings, if you don't mind me asking? About $80,000. It was supposed to be for emergencies, maybe travel someday. Bernard and I have been careful savers our whole lives. Patricia pulled out another document. Margaret, I need you to look at something. I went to the bank this morning with your power of attorney form that you'd given me years ago, remember? For emergencies? I nodded. I'd given Patricia limited power of attorney after Bernard died, just in case something happened to me and I needed someone to handle my affairs temporarily. I trusted her completely, and she'd never abused that trust. I checked your account activity. There have been 3 withdrawals in the past month, each for $5,000. They were made at branches you never use and they're signed with your name, but I compared them to your actual signature. They're forgeries. Someone has been stealing from you. The room seemed to tilt. Derek. It has to be Derek. He's the only one who would have access to my account information. He helped me set up online banking last year. Patricia's expression was furious. He's been planning this for a long time, Margaret. Get you into this facility where you're isolated and dependent, then slowly drain your savings. By the time anyone noticed, he'd probably claim you were confused about your finances, or that he was managing them for your own good. The calculation of it was staggering. My son hadn't just decided impulsively to put me in a home. He'd carefully orchestrated a theft, using my institutionalization as cover for financial exploitation. The betrayal went so much deeper than I'd imagined. We need to report this to the police, Patricia said firmly. This is elder abuse and financial fraud. But I have to warn you, Margaret, this is going to get ugly. Derek will fight back with everything he has. Are you prepared for that? I looked at my friend, this woman who'd driven an hour to help me, who'd spent her own time investigating, who believed in my right to autonomy and dignity. Then I thought about Derek, the son I'd raised and sacrificed for, who'd repaid me by stealing my freedom and my money. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared. He's already taken my home and my independence. He's not taking anything else. That evening, Patricia drove me to the police station. The officer who took my statement was young, probably in his late 20s, and I could see the discomfort on his face as I explained the situation. "Ma'am, these family situations are complicated," he said carefully. "Are you sure your son wasn't just trying to help manage your money?" "I'm sure he wasn't trying to help," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my frustration. "I never gave him permission to access my account. Those signatures are forged. That's fraud regardless of our relationship." The officer took notes but didn't seem particularly motivated. "We'll look into it, but I have to tell you, these cases are hard to prosecute. Family members often have access to each other's financial information, and proving criminal intent is difficult." He wasn't taking me seriously. I could see it in his expression, in the way he kept glancing at the clock as if I were wasting his time. To him, I was just a confused elderly woman making accusations against her well-meaning son. The stereotype was so powerful that even evidence of forgery wasn't enough to overcome it. Patricia saw my frustration and stepped in. "Officer, Mrs. Chen has documentation of these forged signatures. She has a lawyer willing to testify that she's mentally competent. This isn't a confused elderly woman imagining things. This is financial exploitation, and it's a crime." The officer's expression remained skeptical. Like I said, "We'll look into it." But the patronizing tone told us everything. This wasn't going to be prioritized. We were on our own. As Patricia drove me back to Serenity Pines, I felt the weight of what I was facing. Derek had institutional power on his side, the assumption that adult children act in their parents' best interests, the stereotype of elderly confusion, the difficulty of proving criminal intent in family financial matters. I had truth on my side, but truth wasn't always enough. Back in my room that night, I called Rachel Chen, the elder law attorney. I told her about the forged withdrawals, about Derek's manufactured medical concerns, about Dr. Morrison's willingness to testify to my competence. Rachel listened carefully, and when I finished, she said something that surprised me. "Margaret, I think we can win this, but not the way you're expecting. We're not going to wait for the criminal justice system to catch up. We're going to file an emergency petition for guardianship, with you petitioning to be your own guardian." "I don't understand. How can I be my own guardian? Right now, you're in a legal gray area. You're not under formal guardianship, but your son is making decisions for you as if he has that authority. By proactively petitioning the court to establish that you're competent to manage your own affairs, we force Derek to either contest it or back down. If he contests it, we get our day in court where we present all the evidence of your competence in his exploitation. If he backs down, you win by default." The strategy was brilliant. Instead of waiting to be declared incompetent, I'd be asserting my competence, forcing the system to prove otherwise rather than the reverse. "But Rachel," I said slowly, "won't that be expensive? Court cases, attorney fees, I don't have unlimited resources, especially now that Derek's been stealing from me." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, my mother was in a situation similar to yours before she died. Her brother convinced doctors she had dementia when she was just grieving. By the time I became a lawyer and understood what had happened, it was too late to help her. I've dedicated my practice to making sure other families don't go through what we did. My fee for this case is $2,000, which I know is still significant, but it's what I can do. And we're going to make sure the court orders Derek to return every penny he stole, plus damages." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Thank you, Rachel. You don't know what this means." "I do know," she said gently. "Now let's start building our case. I need you to document everything. Every interaction with staff at Serenity Pines, every restriction on your freedom, every conversation with Derek. Keep a journal. Get statements from your friends about your capabilities. Most importantly, I need you to demonstrate your independence every single day. Take walks, manage your own schedule, make decisions. We need to show the court that you're not someone who needs institutionalization." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a woman on a mission. I kept a detailed journal of every day at Serenity Pines, noting the infantilizing language staff used, the restrictions on freedom that weren't legally enforceable but were socially enforced, the ways residents were discouraged from independence. I documented the quality of care, which was adequate but impersonal, focused on safety and routine rather than individual dignity and choice. I made friends with other residents, particularly those like Gladys who were also fighting their circumstances. We formed an informal support group, 5 of us who met in Gladys's room each evening to share our stories and strategies. There was Harold, a 78-year-old former professor whose daughter had placed him here after his wife died, claiming he was too depressed to live alone. There was Susan, only 69, with early-stage Parkinson's that her son had exaggerated into complete disability. There was James, 81, whose nephew had gained power of attorney through deception and was slowly selling off his assets. Each story was a variation on the same theme: family members who decided they knew better than we did about our own lives, who used our age and minor health issues as justification for taking control, who benefited financially from our institutionalization either through access to mattered. I was a resident, which meant I was subject to rules and oversight without recourse. I went back to my room and called Rachel immediately. They searched my room. I think they were looking for my journal for documentation. Rachel's voice was sharp with concern. Did they take anything? I don't think so. I keep my important documents with Patricia now, and I had my journal with me. But Rachel, they're building a case that I'm paranoid and difficult. Every time I assert my rights, it becomes evidence against me. That's standard institutional gaslighting, Rachel said. They're creating a record of you being uncooperative, which Derek will use to argue you need guardianship. But here's what they don't understand. Every instance of you standing up for yourself is also evidence of your competence and your clear understanding of your rights. We'll frame it that way in court. A person who's truly incompetent doesn't systematically advocate for their legal rights with clear logical arguments. Her words helped, but the stress was taking its toll. I wasn't sleeping well. The food at Serenity Pines was bland and served at times that didn't match my natural rhythms. I missed my home, my independence, my life. I found myself wondering if it would be easier to just give up, to accept this new reality, to stop fighting. Then I'd remember Derek's smug face, the way he'd lied so easily, the money he'd stolen, and my resolve would harden. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for every elderly person whose family decided convenience mattered more than autonomy. 2 weeks before the hearing, Rachel arranged for a psychiatric evaluation by an independent expert. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a clinical psychologist who specialized in geriatric assessments, and she spent 4 hours with me over 2 sessions, conducting cognitive tests, memory assessments, and evaluating my decision-making capacity. She asked about my life history, my current situation, my plans for the future. She gave me puzzles and problems to solve, questions to answer, scenarios to navigate. At the end of the second session, Dr. Martinez closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Mrs. Chen, I want to be very clear with you. My evaluation will state that you are fully competent to make your own decisions, manage your own affairs, and live independently. Your cognitive function is excellent for your age, actually better than many people decades younger. You show clear understanding of your situation, logical thinking, appropriate emotional responses, and strong executive function. There is absolutely no medical or psychological justification for you to be under guardianship or to be institutionalized against your will. The relief was overwhelming. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, not just seeing an elderly woman and making assumptions. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Mrs. Chen, I've been doing these evaluations for 20 years and I've seen far too many cases like yours. Families who confuse normal aging with incompetence, who use minor health issues or isolated incidents of forgetfulness as justification for taking control. The bias against elderly autonomy is pervasive and destructive. Your son has done something terrible to you, and I'll make sure the court knows it. As the hearing date approached, I felt the weight of everything that hung in the balance. If I won, I'd be free to leave Serenity Pines to rebuild my life, to hold Derek accountable for what he'd done. If I lost, Derek would become my legal guardian, with complete control over my finances, my living situation, my medical care, every aspect of my life. I would become, in essence, a legal non-person stripped of rights that most people take for granted. The night before the hearing, my friends from the support group gathered in Gladys's room one last time. Harold had managed to sneak in a bottle of wine, and we passed it around in coffee mugs, toasting to hope and justice and the chance to reclaim our lives. You're going to win, Margaret, Susan said with conviction. You have everything on your side. The truth, the documentation, expert testimony. The judge will see what Derek really is. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned that truth didn't always triumph, that justice wasn't guaranteed, that courts sometimes sided with family members who claimed good intentions despite clear evidence of harm. But I also knew I had something Derek didn't have. I had genuine allies who believed in me not because they wanted something from me, but because they recognized my humanity and my rights. I had a lawyer who was fighting not just for money but for principle. And I had a clear conscience, knowing I'd done everything possible to stand up for myself. Patricia picked me up early the next morning to drive to the courthouse. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that was professional but not frumpy, low heels that showed I was steady on my feet, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look like the competent, independent woman I was, not the declining elderly patient Derek had portrayed. Patricia had done my hair, and I'd applied makeup carefully, knowing that appearance would matter, that judges were human and susceptible to the same biases as everyone else. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in a harsh glow. Derek was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and Jennifer sat beside him with her hand on his arm in a gesture of support. My grandchildren weren't there, thank God. At least Derek had enough sense not to subject them to this. Rachel sat beside me at our table, her materials organized in neat folders. She squeezed my hand briefly. Remember, Margaret, stay calm no matter what they say. Answer questions clearly. Our assets or through relief from feeling obligated to help us. We weren't in Serenity Pines because we needed to be here. We were here because it was convenient for someone else. Our evening meetings became therapeutic and strategic. We shared information about elder rights, about how to document abuse, about lawyers and advocacy organizations. Harold, with his academic background, helped us research case law. Susan, who'd been a paralegal before her diagnosis, helped us understand legal procedures. Gladys, who'd been fighting longest, gave us warnings about pitfalls and false hope. James, who'd been a financial advisor, helped us protect our remaining assets. One evening, Harold said something that crystallized everything. You know what the real crime is? It's not that we're old or that we have health issues. It's that society has decided those things make us less than full human beings, less deserving of autonomy and respect. Our families didn't invent this attitude. They're just acting on beliefs that are everywhere in how we treat elderly people. We're supposed to be grateful for being warehoused. We're supposed to accept that our opinions matter less. We're supposed to fade quietly into the background of our own lives. His words resonated with all of us because we'd all felt it, that subtle and sometimes not so subtle message that our time was over, that we should step aside, that younger people knew better. It wasn't just Derek who thought this way. It was the doctor who dismissed my concerns about medication side effects because elderly people are often confused. It was the bank teller who'd spoken loudly and slowly to me as if age affected hearing and intelligence equally. It was the social worker at Serenity Pines who'd smiled indulgently when I said I wanted to leave, as if my desires were childish whims rather than legitimate rights. My petition for self-guardianship was filed 3 weeks after I'd been placed at Serenity Pines. The legal document, prepared by Rachel, was comprehensive and devastating. It outlined Derek's deceptions, the forged signatures, the manufactured medical crisis, the unauthorized termination of my lease. It included statements from Dr. Morrison, from Patricia, from my other friends, all attesting to my competence and independence. It included my own detailed account of what had happened, written in clear, logical prose that demonstrated my mental acuity. Derek's response came fast and furious. Within 48 hours of being served with the petition, he filed a counter-petition for emergency guardianship, claiming I was a danger to myself, that I was delusional and paranoid, that my accusations against him were evidence of declining mental health. He claimed I'd become combative and resistant to care at Serenity Pines, that staff were concerned about my welfare. He presented the grocery bag incident from months ago as evidence of dangerous forgetfulness. He even got Mrs. Kowalski to sign a statement saying she'd been worried about my confusion that day, though when Patricia talked to her, Mrs. Kowalski admitted Derek had called her repeatedly asking leading questions until she agreed to sign something. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which felt like an eternity. During that time, Derek's behavior became increasingly aggressive. He visited Serenity Pines frequently, always accompanied by Jennifer, always making a show of concerned son checking on his ailing mother. He brought the grandchildren once, clearly coached to ask me questions designed to test my memory. Grandma, do you remember my birthday? What year were you born? What did you have for breakfast? I answered every question correctly while fighting the urge to scream at Derek for using his own children as weapons in his campaign to prove me incompetent. The kids looked uncomfortable, old enough to sense the tension even if they didn't understand the full situation. After that visit, I didn't see them again. Derek had gotten what he needed, witnesses who could testify that he was a dutiful son trying his best with a difficult parent. He also worked to isolate me from my support system. He called Patricia and told her she was enabling my delusions, that her visits were upsetting me, that she should stay away if she really cared about my well-being. Patricia, bless her, told him exactly where he could put his opinions and continued visiting twice a week. But he had more success with some of my other friends, who were elderly themselves and frightened by Derek's authoritative certainty that I was mentally declining. 2 of the women from our Saturday lunch group stopped visiting, later telling Patricia they didn't want to get involved in family business. The staff at Serenity Pines also began treating me differently after Derek's visits. I'd overhear whispered conversations about how I was difficult, how I resisted help, how I made accusations against my devoted son. My requests to come and go freely were met with increasing resistance, always framed as concern for my safety. When I insisted on my rights, I was told I was being aggressive and uncooperative. The gaslighting was comprehensive and coordinated. One particularly difficult day, about 4 weeks into my stay, I returned from a walk to find my room had been searched. Items had been moved, drawers opened, my journal was no longer where I'd left it. I immediately went to the front desk. Someone has been in my room without my permission. That's a violation of my privacy. The woman at the desk, a supervisor named Carol, smiled that patient smile I'd come to hate. Margaret, housekeeping cleans all rooms daily. Nothing was taken, I'm sure. This wasn't housekeeping. My personal belongings have been gone through. I want to file a formal complaint. Carol's smile didn't waver. I'll make a note of your concern. Is there anything else I can help you with? The dismissiveness was absolute. I had no power here, no voice that. And directly. Don't let them make you angry or emotional. Show the judge the competent, thoughtful woman I know you are. I nodded, my mouth dry with nervousness. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. The Honorable Judge Patricia Simmons presided over the case, and I allowed myself a moment of hope at the coincidence that she shared my best friend's name. Maybe it was a good omen. Judge Simmons reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up at both parties. This is a petition for self-guardianship by Margaret Chen, contested by her son Derek Patterson, who has filed a counterpetition for emergency guardianship. Let's begin with Mrs. Chen's petition. Ms. Chen, you may present your opening statement. Rachel stood, and her voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, this case represents a fundamental question about elder rights and family power. Margaret Chen is a 72-year-old woman who was deceived by her son, removed from her home through fraud, placed in an assisted living facility against her will, and then had money stolen from her accounts through forged signatures. Mr. Patterson claims he acted out of concern for his mother's welfare, but the evidence will show a pattern of manipulation, financial exploitation, and a systematic campaign to strip Mrs. Chen of her autonomy. We will demonstrate through expert testimony, medical records, and witness statements that Mrs. Chen is fully competent to manage her own life, and that she has been gravely harmed by her son's actions. Derek's lawyer, Ms. Brendan Hartwick, rose for her opening statement. Your Honor, this case is about a devoted son trying to protect his aging mother from her own declining judgment. Mrs. Chen has shown increasing signs of confusion, forgetfulness, and poor decision-making. Her neighbors have expressed concern. Her living conditions were deteriorating. Mr. Patterson made the difficult but necessary decision to ensure his mother's safety by placing her in a quality care facility. Mrs. Chen's accusations against her son are, sadly, evidence of the paranoia and hostility that often accompany cognitive decline. We ask the court to grant Mr. Patterson guardianship so he can continue providing the care his mother needs. The framing was masterful and infuriating. Every act of self-advocacy I'd made was being reinterpreted as evidence of incompetence. My resistance to Derek's control was paranoia. My desire for independence was poor judgment. My anger at being deceived was hostility. This was the central challenge. How do you prove you're competent when the act of defending yourself is used as evidence that you're not? Judge Simmons called the first witness, Dr. Morrison, my primary care physician. Dr. Morrison took the stand and was sworn in, and Rachel began her questioning. Dr. Morrison, how long have you been Mrs. Chen's doctor? For approximately 8 years. And during that time, have you had concerns about Mrs. Chen's cognitive function or her ability to live independently? No, none whatsoever. Mrs. Chen is in good health for her age. She manages her medications appropriately, attends her appointments, follows medical advice, and shows no signs of dementia or significant cognitive decline. Rachel presented medical records supporting this testimony, then asked, "Did Mr. Patterson contact you regarding his mother's health?" "Yes, he called my office about 3 months ago asking questions about her cognitive function and whether I thought she needed assisted living." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that his mother was doing very well and that I saw no medical reason for her to require assisted living. She was fully capable of independent living." Ms. Hartwick cross-examined, asking pointed questions. "Dr. Morrison, isn't it true that elderly patients can hide symptoms of decline? That they can appear fine in a doctor's office but struggle at home?" Dr. Morrison remained firm. "It's possible, but in Mrs. Chen's case, I've had no indication of that. Her medical history shows consistent competence over 8 years. But you only see her a few times a year. You don't see how she manages daily life." "That's correct, which is why I rely on the patient's self-reporting, family input, and observable signs during appointments. Mrs. Chen has consistently demonstrated good self-care, clear communication, and appropriate medical decision-making." Ms. Hartwick tried to plant seeds of doubt, but Dr. Morrison's testimony stood strong. The next witness was Dr. Martinez, the psychologist who'd evaluated me. Her testimony was even more powerful. Rachel walked her through the evaluation process, the tests administered, the areas assessed. Dr. Martinez explained in clear terms that my cognitive function was normal, that I showed no signs of dementia, depression, or any other condition that would impair my decision-making capacity. I performed at or above age norms on every assessment. My memory, reasoning, judgment, and executive function are all intact. Ms. Hartwick's cross-examination focused on my accusations against Derek. "Dr. Martinez, did Mrs. Chen express anger toward her son during your evaluation?" "Yes, she did." "And isn't that anger, that hostility, potentially a sign of paranoia or cognitive distortion?" Dr. Martinez's response was sharp and clear. "No, counselor. Mrs. Chen's anger is an appropriate emotional response to being deceived and having her autonomy violated. Anger at injustice is not a symptom of mental illness. It's a sign of intact emotional processing. In fact, I'd be more concerned if she wasn't angry given what's been done to her." The courtroom was silent for a moment. Judge Simmons was leaning forward slightly, clearly engaged. Ms. Hartwick tried another angle. But couldn't her belief that her son stole from her be a delusion? Financial paranoia is common in elderly patients. It could be if there wasn't concrete evidence supporting her claim. But Mrs. Chen's accusations are backed by bank records showing forged signatures and unauthorized withdrawals. Her belief isn't a delusion. It's an accurate assessment of documented facts. Patricia testified next, describing my capabilities and independence before Derek's intervention. She detailed our friendship, my volunteer work, my active social life, my management of my own household and finances. She described finding the forged signatures and Derek's unauthorized termination of my lease. Her testimony was emotional but credible, the words of a friend who genuinely knew me and cared about my well-being. Then Derek took the stand, and I had to watch my son lie under oath. He described a mother who was declining rapidly, who'd become confused and forgetful, who'd left the stove on multiple times, who'd gotten lost in her own neighborhood. None of it was true, but he spoke with such conviction that I wondered if he'd started believing his own fiction. He claimed the grocery bag incident was just one example of many concerning behaviors. He said he'd acted out of love, that placing me at Serenity Pines was the hardest decision he'd ever made, that he only wanted what was best for me. Rachel's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Patterson, You testified that you acted out of concern for your mother's safety. Yes, that's correct. Yet you never discussed your concerns with her directly, never suggested she see additional doctors, never offered to help her in her own home. You went straight to institutionalization without her knowledge or consent. Is that accurate? Derek shifted uncomfortably. I knew she would resist. She's stubborn. Elderly people often don't recognize their own decline. So you decided you knew better than your mother, better than her doctor, better than her friends who saw her regularly. You decided to take complete control of her life without giving her any voice in the decision. I was protecting her. From what, exactly? From living independently in the home she loved? From maintaining the friendships and activities that gave her life meaning? From having autonomy over her own body and choices? Derek's lawyer objected, but Judge Simmons allowed Rachel to continue. Mr. Patterson, are you aware that 3 withdrawals totaling $15,000 were made from your mother's account over the past 2 months? Derek's face paled slightly. I'm not aware of the specific details of her finances. These withdrawals were made with forged signatures. Did you make these withdrawals? No, absolutely not. Do you have access to your mother's banking information? I helped her set up online banking, but I don't have her passwords or account access. Rachel produced bank records and signature analyses. Your Honor, these documents show that the withdrawals were made at branches near Mr. Patterson's workplace, at times when Mrs. Chen was volunteering at the library with dozens of witnesses placing her elsewhere. The signature analysis clearly shows forgery. Mr. Patterson claims ignorance, yet he's the only person who had both motive and means to commit this theft. The evidence was damning, and I watched Derek's composure crack. His lawyer tried to redirect, to refocus on his supposed concern for me, but the financial theft hung in the air like a conviction. Judge Simmons asked Derek directly about his financial situation, about whether he stood to benefit from control over my assets. He stammered through answers about temporary difficulties, about meaning to pay the money back, about how it wasn't relevant to the guardianship question. But his credibility was shattered. I testified last, and Rachel had prepared me well. I spoke calmly about my life before Derek's intervention, about my capabilities and my independence. I described the deception, the betrayal, the loss of my home. I explained that I wasn't asking the court to punish my son, though he deserved punishment. I was asking for the basic human right to control my own life, to make my own decisions, to live with dignity and autonomy. Under cross-examination, Ms. Hartwick tried to rattle me, asking rapid questions about dates and details, trying to catch me in confusion or contradiction. But my mind was clear, my memory sharp, and I answered every question accurately. She asked about the grocery bag incident, and I explained exactly what had happened without defensiveness or anger. She asked about my health, and I acknowledged my arthritis and high blood pressure, while noting that millions of people manage these conditions while living independently. Judge Simmons called a brief recess before her ruling. Patricia, Rachel, and I sat in the hallway, and I felt the weight of everything that had happened. Regardless of the outcome, my relationship with Derek was destroyed. I'd lost my home, spent weeks imprisoned in a facility, had my competence questioned publicly. Even if I won, the scars would remain. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Simmons had a stack of papers in front of her, and an expression I couldn't read. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony carefully, she began. This case raises important questions about family authority, elder rights, and the balance between protection and autonomy. The court finds that Mrs. Margaret Chen is fully competent to manage her own affairs. The medical and psychological evidence clearly demonstrates intact cognitive function, sound judgment, and appropriate decision-making capacity. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost couldn't hear the rest. The court further finds that Mr. Derek Patterson's actions constitute elder abuse through deception, false imprisonment, and financial exploitation. The petition for guardianship is denied, and Mrs. Chen's petition for self-guardianship is granted as a protective measure. Additionally, the court orders Mr. Patterson to return all funds wrongfully taken from his mother's accounts and awards Mrs. Chen damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Derek stood abruptly, his face red with anger and humiliation. Judge Simmons wasn't finished. Mr. Patterson, what you did to your mother is unconscionable. You lied to medical professionals, you forged documents, you stole money, and you imprisoned a competent adult against her will. You're fortunate that Mrs. Chen isn't pressing criminal charges. This court warns you that any further contact with your mother against her wishes will result in restraining orders and possible prosecution. Do you understand? Derek nodded stiffly, unable to speak. Patricia drove me away from the courthouse, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I was free. Legally, officially, undeniably free. Rachel had already contacted Serenity Pines to inform them I'd be leaving immediately, and Patricia had found me a temporary apartment while I decided what came next. 3 months later, I stood in my new apartment, smaller than my old one but bright and warm and entirely mine. I'd reconnected with my volunteer work, with my friends, with my life. Derek had returned the stolen money as ordered, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Jennifer were struggling financially. I felt no satisfaction in that, only sadness at what might have been if my son had chosen love over greed. I never saw Derek again. He made no attempt to apologize or reconcile, and I didn't seek him out. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. But I found new family in unexpected places. Patricia became closer than any sister could be. Rachel and I stayed in touch, and I volunteered with her practice helping other elderly people fight similar battles. The friends from Serenity Pines became my advocacy circle. Gladys eventually won her case too, and we celebrated together. At 73 now, I live exactly as I choose. I take watercolor classes for real, this time at a community center I found myself. I travel when I want, spend my money as I please, make every decision about my own life. I learned that autonomy isn't something that diminishes with age, unless we allow others to take it from us. I learned that fighting for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And I learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. The scars remain, but so does my strength. And that, I've decided, is enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.